Have you ever experienced something around you that felt unexplainable? Today, we bring you stories that are not just terrifying to hear, but even more chilling to imagine. Believe it or not, these tales won't let you feel at ease for a single moment. Let's get started. In December 2024, a strange fog crept over Los Angeles. But this wasn't just any fog. It carried a sharp chemical scent, like burnt fireworks, and left behind an eerie purple residue. Then came the reports. Identical fogs appearing worldwide, people and animals showing disturbing symptoms. Panic spread. This wasn't weather, this was something else, something sinister. Now the real question wasn't just what this fog was, but who or what was behind it. And most chilling of all, why? The answer would be more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. You won't want to miss this. On the afternoon of December 5th, 2024, a 34-year-old contractor named Ethan was driving home through the outskirts of Los Angeles. His mind was elsewhere, an overdue electric bill, a half-listened-to talk radio segment, the usual worries of the day. But as he rounded a bend, something made him tighten his grip on the wheel. A thick wall of fog was rolling in over the distant skyline. At first, it looked like any ordinary low-hanging cloud. But something about it felt off. The way it clung to the buildings, the way it moved. Curiosity got the better of him. He rolled down his window, and that's when he caught it. The smell hit Ethan first. A sharp, acrid scent, like gunpowder after a fireworks show. He wrinkled his nose, but brushed it off. LA air isn't exactly fresh, he thought, assuming it was just another layer of pollution. As the days rolled by, the city buzzed with Christmas shopping, and he hardly gave the fog a second thought. But then, during a quick stop at the hardware store, he overheard two customers grumbling about a strange haze that kept leaving an impossible-to-clean residue on their windshields. A neighbor casually mentioned waking up to that same biting smell drifting through open windows just before dawn. Weird, Ethan thought, but again, Louisiana was notorious for its smog, so whatever. Still, he found himself glancing up at the sky more often, half expecting the fog to thicken, half waiting for something more. Then, just days before Christmas, social media erupted. This isn't normal rain, this fog just won't go away. I've had a migraine from hell all day. Anyone else? Went home sick this morning. Is this fog making people sick? Should we be wearing gas masks? What's going on? Ethan scrolled, an uneasy feeling creeping in. This wasn't just in LA anymore. People everywhere were noticing it. And something told him, this was only the beginning. The strangest part? The taste. It wasn't just a smell anymore, it was something people felt in their throats. That sharp, sulfuric bite, like the air after a fireworks show. Ethan scrolled through posts on X, seeing the same eerie descriptions pop up. Tampa Bay, London, Manchester, different cities, same story. Photos appeared, sidewalks and car hoods streaked with faint purple smears. Not quite soot, not quite dust. It was getting harder to ignore, yet somehow Ethan still did. Weird, sure, he thought, but explainable. Until that night. After dinner, he absent-mindedly checked his feed again, only to find something even stranger. A man in Orange County swore his outdoor lights flickered whenever a thicker wave of fog rolled in. Someone from San Bernardino said wildlife was acting off. Nightbirds calling at the wrong hours, dogs whining, pawing at doors, refusing to go outside. Still, nobody sounded panicked. Not yet.
Then his roommate barged into the kitchen, rambling about a coworker who had just returned from New England. The guy claimed the same thing was happening there, except instead of fog, it was snow. Discolored, sticky, and carrying that same sour chemical tang.
Ethan stirred his coffee, only half listening. His mind was somewhere else, because now, no matter how hard he tried to brush it off, one thought wouldn't leave him. How could the exact same phenomenon be happening in Florida swamps, Boston snowfall, and an LA suburb, all at once? By New Year's Eve, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I skimmed through local news reports, curious to see if anyone was actually talking about the fog. And they were, sort of. Most anchors dismissed it as unusually persistent weather. One online article mentioned scattered complaints of headaches and runny noses across California.
Then, there was a scientist on air, offering a calm, measured explanation. Temperature inversions could be trapping pollutants. Or maybe this was just advection fog, common in winter. But something about the way it was being handled felt wrong. Nobody wanted to admit that this was anything but normal.
It's likely just a case of temperature inversions trapping pollutants, or perhaps advection fog, which is common in winter.
But something about the way it was being handled felt wrong. Nobody wanted to admit that this was anything but normal.
I know fog. I've seen fog, but I've never seen this. It's been a blanket over the city since December 23rd. It's the 27th now, and I still can't see past the buildings. It's not lifting, it's just sitting here.
And it wasn't just the UK, Tampa Bay, Berlin, Sydney, the same descriptions, the same lingering fog, the same unsettling chemical-like smell. But the real turning point came that night, when a man named Clark Payne in Boston decided to take matters into his own hands. He stepped outside, scooped up a handful of fresh snow that had fallen during one of these fog events, and took it inside for a closer look. Under a microscope, Clark Payne's...
By January 1st, fear had taken hold. People weren't just talking about the fog anymore, they were feeling it. Person 1, VO. Last night I had a terrible stomachache. Person 2, VO. My sinuses are inflamed. I can't sleep. I have no appetite. Person 3, VO. I don't know what this is, but this isn't normal.
Across social media, the same symptoms repeated. Sore throats, body aches, sudden exhaustion. Some people came down with flu-like symptoms, while others found themselves unable to sleep at all.
Ethan had brushed off the fog before, but that morning he woke up feeling off. His eyes were gritty, his head heavy. Despite the holiday, reports were flooding in from all over California. The fog was still there. It refused to dissipate. And now, people weren't just getting sick, they were starting to panic. He stepped onto his front porch, inhaling deeply. And there it was. A taste. A feeling in the air. Not just pollution. Not just smog. Something else.
January 2nd brought even more unsettling discoveries. A woman in Texas posted a video of her backyard pool, showing a strange residue floating on the water's surface after a thick wave of fog had passed. Woman, VO. This shouldn't be happening. Fog doesn't leave stuff behind. More theories poured in. Person 4, VO. This reminds me of what happened in Russia during a military test. Person 5, VO. I woke up with a sore throat. We're breathing this in. Person 6, VO. This isn't natural. This is some kind of chemical fog. Then came the most disturbing theory of all. A growing number of people were pointing to a specific bacteria, Serratia marcescens, known to cause respiratory infections, meningitis, and even heart inflammation. But it got worse. Some believed the fog contained sulfur dioxide, the same chemical responsible for its pungent smell. And when sulfur dioxide interacts with Serratia marcescens, it can enhance the bacteria's effects, making it more dangerous. Before anyone could dismiss it as paranoia, one fact resurfaced. In September of 1950, the U.S. Navy conducted a secret operation. A classified experiment that tested the very same bacteria on an unsuspecting population. And if history was repeating itself, then this fog wasn't just a mystery, it was a warning. History had a way of repeating itself. And the deeper people dug into the mystery of the fog, the more unsettling the connections became. In 1950, the U.S. Navy conducted a secret experiment called Operation Sea Spray. Their goal? To see how vulnerable San Francisco would be to a bioweapon attack. For a week, they sprayed 2 types of bacteria, one of them being Serratia marcescens, just 2 miles off the coast. Nobody knew. Nobody consented.
Weeks later, people started getting sick. Doctors were baffled. At least 11 residents developed rare, deadly infections. 1 person died. And when the military took samples, they found that not just San Francisco, but surrounding areas had been exposed, and no one had been told. Now, decades later, this fog was doing things no natural weather event should. A man in Germany reported that the moment the haze rolled in, all the birds went silent. His normally calm dog suddenly lost control, barking, spinning in circles, acting like something wasn't right.
It was like they sensed something we couldn't. The silence was eerie, and my dogs, they just went crazy.
Across the world, in Western Australia, farmers began noticing the same thing. Livestock refused to go near areas where the fog had settled, avoiding it like it carried something humans couldn't detect.
The cattle wouldn't go near the fog. It was like they knew something we didn't. It was unsettling.
And then there were the people. Some reported symptoms no doctor could explain. Others, like a woman from Tampa Bay, claimed that after breathing in the fog, her dreams turned into something unnatural.
Every night, the same vivid nightmare. A strange purple light flickering in the distance. And every night it was getting closer.
For nearly a decade, one of the greatest aviation mysteries in history remained unsolved. But just when the world had begun to move on, Malaysia announced it was resuming its search for the missing flight. And then, almost as if triggered by that very decision, something bizarre started happening. Across the globe, strange drones and eerie glowing orbs began appearing in the skies. At first, no one linked these events to the vanished plane, but one determined investigator, a user on X who had spent years researching Flight 507, pointed out a chilling connection, one that made thousands stop and rethink everything they knew. According to his findings, these mysterious orbs might not just be a coincidence. They could be directly tied to the disappearance of Flight 507. And here's where things get even more unsettling. There were 20 top scientists aboard that flight, all reportedly on the verge of a groundbreaking technological discovery. A discovery so significant, it could have rewritten everything we know about our world. To truly understand how deep this goes, we need to look at what happened that fateful night. On March 8, 2014, Horizon Airlines Flight 507 took off from Kuala Lumpur just after midnight. It was supposed to be a routine 6-hour journey to Beijing. On board were 2 experienced pilots, 10 flight attendants, and 227 passengers. For the first 38 minutes, everything was normal. The aircraft cruised over the Gulf of Thailand following its planned route. Then, at precisely 1 a.m., Malaysian Air Traffic Control instructed the pilots to switch frequencies to Thailand's airspace control. The pilot acknowledged the request, wished them good night, and prepared to make the transition. That was the last time anyone ever heard from Flight 507. Instead of following its designated route, the plane made a sudden, inexplicable turn. Then, without warning, it banked sharply to the left. An extreme maneuver that defied standard aviation protocol. Before it could even establish contact with Thai air traffic control, the aircraft disappeared. Not just from radio communication, from radar entirely. It was as if the plane had simply ceased to exist. And then, just when you think it couldn't get stranger, the plane was suddenly detected again. But it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Somehow, it had turned back, heading south, back toward Malaysia. What happened next remains one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in modern history. The plane didn't just disappear, something or someone made it vanish. At 1:19 a.m., the pilots of Horizon Airlines Flight 507 made their final radio transmission. 3 minutes later, at exactly 1:21 a.m., something chilling happened. The plane's transponder was turned off. This wasn't an accident. Someone on board had deliberately disabled it, cutting the aircraft off from all commercial radar systems. Then, at 1:25 a.m., military radar picked up the plane one last time. Whoever was controlling it at this point wasn't panicking. They knew exactly what they were doing. The plane maneuvered with such precision that investigators later confirmed it had to be a highly skilled pilot. And then, nothing. Flight 507 had vanished. But this is where the mystery takes an even darker turn. The very next day, something impossible started happening. Family members of the missing passengers began calling their loved ones' phones. And the phones were ringing. Not just for a few hours, not even just for a few days. They were ringing for up to 8 months. How? A phone battery doesn't last that long unless someone is keeping it charged. So if those phones weren't at the bottom of the ocean, where were they? Then came the press conference, where things got even weirder. Officials mentioned seeing unidentified objects on radar, strange blobs surrounding the plane before it disappeared. And in 2014, just 2 months after the incident, a user named Regicide uploaded a video that changed everything. The footage allegedly shows Flight 507 in its final moments. Swarming around the aircraft were 3 glowing orbs, moving in ways no known technology should be able to. At the bottom of the screen, a mouse cursor and letters suggested that someone had been recording their computer monitor, almost like they weren't supposed to have this footage. And then, right before our eyes, the plane vanishes. Not explodes, not crashes, just disappears. Another video, supposedly from a military drone, surfaced soon after. This time, it showed a thermal image of the aircraft. A heat trail followed the plane almost as if it were burning, and then those same glowing orbs appeared, encircling the aircraft in perfect formation. Moments later, the plane was gone. Fast forward to today. Across the world, those same orbs are being spotted again, near nuclear reactors, moving in unexplainable formations, appearing in military airspace. And here's where it gets even crazier. Flight 507 wasn't just carrying everyday passengers. On board were 20 top scientists working on a classified project, something known as zero-point energy. If real, this energy source would change everything we know about power, technology, and the very fabric of reality. And if someone, or something, didn't want that technology to exist, maybe Flight 507 didn't just disappear. Maybe it was taken. If we have this technology, where did it come from? The orbs seen around Flight 507's disappearance have baffled experts for years, but according to researcher Ashton Forbes, they might not be just mysterious lights. He believes they could be plasmoids, autonomous balls of plasma, a form of self-sustaining energy that science is only beginning to understand. But if we already possess this kind of technology, who created it? There's another theory, that the drones appearing all over the world today aren't plasmoids themselves. Instead, they're chasing these energy-based entities, tracking them for reasons we still don't fully understand. And then out of nowhere, social media blew up with posts claiming to have found the wreckage of Flight 507. Videos on Instagram and TikTok showed airplane debris that looked eerily similar to a Boeing 777. But here's the catch. You can't identify a plane just by looking at its parts. You need a serial number. And from all the supposed wreckage found, not a single piece had one. Meaning, that debris could have come from any Boeing 777, not necessarily Flight 507. In the early hours of April 2, 2014, Flight 507 vanished without a trace. It was supposed to be a routine flight, but somewhere over the Atlantic, it simply disappeared from radar. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, just gone. Then, as people started taking a closer look at the infamous orb footage, the one many dismissed as fake, they noticed something chilling. The details in the video matched the characteristics of a highly sophisticated military satellite system. And the biggest clue? A tiny identification tag in the corner of the video. This tag identified which satellite had recorded the footage. That exact satellite was launched in 2006, and its orbit placed it precisely where Flight 507 disappeared. But that wasn't all. Ashton Forbes discovered that in the video, the mouse cursor moved at 24 frames per second, while the background moved at only 6 frames per second. Why does that matter? Because it suggests that someone was logged into a military database, recording their screen. And if that's true, it means whoever leaked this footage had access to top-secret military surveillance. Whoever they were careful. They stripped the video of sensitive HUD data, removed classified information, and left just enough evidence to expose what really happened. And then, things took an even darker turn. About a week after the video surfaced, a lieutenant commander named Edward Zeeland was arrested. My lawyers claimed that the investigation into me had started on April 2, 2014, just weeks after Flight 507 disappeared. And here's the real kicker. My lawyers argued that the classified information I was accused of leaking was already available on the internet. So if it wasn't these videos, then what was it? And here's the final question. Why did the plane divert from its path before these orbs even appeared? Because Flight 507 was carrying something highly unstable, a shipment of lithium-ion batteries. And what happened next may have changed history forever. And then came the moment everything changed. At 9:19 p.m. the pilot calmly signed off. Good night, Horizon Airlines Flight 507. An explosion. A massive fireball seen 300 miles away by an oil rig worker named Mike McKay. At that same moment, along the coast, 9 different witnesses reported hearing loud, thunderous sounds. The plane had just gone dark. But then, something bizarre happened. At 9:30 p.m., another pilot claimed he heard one of Flight 507's crew members over the radio, and it wasn't just him. 8 fishermen spotted the plane flying at an unusually low altitude, as if the pilots were desperately trying to get to breathable air. Then, in a shocking revelation, Malaysia's Minister of Defense admitted their military tracked the aircraft. They even knew it was a civilian plane, but for some reason, they claimed they couldn't identify it. Why? By 9:52 p.m., something undeniable happened. The co-pilot's cell phone pinged a tower over Langkawi, Malaysia. That means the plane was still in the air. So what was really going on? Had they managed to contain the fire? Or had they already made contact with someone on the ground? Because Flight 507 didn't land, it kept flying. Until 10:40 p.m., when an eyewitness named Kate saw something terrifying. A glowing orange plane, dark smoke pouring from it. That detail matches exactly what would happen if the crew had been battling a raging lithium battery fire using halon fire suppression systems. And that's when the orbs appeared, the same mysterious objects we saw in those now infamous leaked videos. And this lines up perfectly with one final chilling detail. According to a single Chinese transmission, the last known message from Flight 507 reported it was making an emergency landing. But then, it disintegrated, and the final clue? In the orb footage, you can clearly see cumulus clouds. Clouds that only form between 1,000 and 5,000 feet, meaning, the plane wasn't just still in the air, it was descending, and then, gone. So now, we're left with one final haunting question. Where was Flight 507 taken? That's when theories started pointing to a highly secretive location. And if that's true, then the mystery of Flight 507 isn't just about a missing plane. Flight 507 was an ordinary trip until it vanished without a trace. Families were left in despair and experts were baffled. But what if I told you the mystery goes deeper than anyone ever imagined? It's about something much, much bigger. The phone calls, the satellite images, the island hidden in plain sight.
When researchers analyzed old photos from the region, they found something disturbing. Some of the images had metadata showing they were taken on March 18th, at a place few had considered before.
Now, remember those phone calls? The ones that family members kept dialing months after Flight 507 disappeared? Shockingly, Ashton Forbes and other investigators tracked the cell signals and found something that changed everything. There are only 2 locations in that entire region where those calls could have connected. The other? Diego Garcia. Then things got even weirder.
Long before this mystery even unfolded, a pilot named Alex Keir talked about something mind-blowing. He claimed that Diego Garcia was home to anti-gravity anomalies, a place where equipment was being launched into space without using rockets.
And even more shocking, he claimed we were testing UFO-style aircraft, reverse-engineered from technology we were given.
Think about it. A remote, military-controlled island, a place where experimental technology was being developed.
And now strong evidence suggesting a missing plane may have ended up there. And if that's true, then this was never just about a plane. A whistleblower later reached out to Ashton Forbes with an even more chilling claim. He said the US has had this technology since the 1960s, and from day one, it was never meant to be shared. The real breakthrough came in the early 2000s, with quantum computing. That in turn led to advanced AI technology. What if Flight 507 wasn't just a disappearance? What if it was about keeping this technology out of the wrong hands? And now, with orbs appearing all over the world, moving in patterns we can't explain, what if this is just the beginning of something much, much bigger? Something the world isn't ready for? Unfortunately, because nothing is official, this will likely remain a mystery. But for those who made it this far, drop a comment below saying, "So, I know you're part of the few who see beyond the surface." And if you love cinematic storytelling like this, where we dive deep into the strange, the supernatural, and the unexplained, what are you waiting for? smash that like and subscribe button, because trust me, there's more to this story, and I'll see you in the next episode.